Hi everyone, I welcome each one of you to my channel EconPATHSHALA. Today I'll be discussing about macroeconomic environment. What do I mean by it? Macroeconomic environment of a particular country, say for India or for the United States or for China, that basically reflects the current economic position as summarized through different macroeconomic indicators. There is an analogy between, say, the macroeconomic environment and health parameters of an individual. So, when doctors assess the health parameters of an individual, they basically examine the functioning of the brain, functioning of the heart, or count the blood sugar, lipid profile. So, using different indicators which reflects different aspect of functioning of the body or the physiology, they basically assess whether someone is healthy or suffering from illness, and accordingly they prescribe some medication. Similarly, different macroeconomic indicators are used to assess the current economic conditions of a particular country, which we discuss under macroeconomic environment. Now, we can think of several macroeconomic indicators which basically give a summary measure about the macroeconomic conditions. I have listed here broadly 7 set of indicators, and of course the list is not exhaustive, but these 7 broad indicators are good enough to sort of assess the overall economic conditions of a particular country. Today, I'll be focusing on the first set of indicators, which are given in the form of GDP and economic growth. Let me first explain conceptually what they mean and what aspect of macroeconomic environment they capture. So the GDP is basically a acronym for gross domestic product. GDP captures total value of production of different goods and services in a particular country during a particular period. Say, for example, we can talk of Indian GDP during the financial year 2024-25. So, all production of goods and services, the number of cars, amount of paddy, amount of milk, internet services, communication services, transport services. So all goods and services which are produced in India in between 1st of April 2024 and up to 31st March 2025, if we are counting and summing up, then that reflects Indian GDP for the financial year 2024-25. In India, we also count quarterly GDP for different quarters within a financial year. Say, June, sorry, April 1, 2024 up to June 30th, 2024 constitute the first quarter of the 2024-25 financial year. So all production of goods and services which happened during that period are reflected in India's quarterly GDP for the first quarter in 2024-25. So this is a very important indicator, GDP. It reflects the size of the economy. Size of the economy meaning, I'm repeating, total value of goods and services produced in an economy. Of course, the technical details and complications pertaining to the very concept and measurement of GDP require a separate discussion, which I'll be doing sometime later. So roughly you can say it is basically production of all goods and services, although technically when you define it is final goods and services, and today I don't want to complicate between final and intermediate good. Now, why production of goods and services is important? On the one hand, more production of goods and services gives the opportunity to citizens of a country to consume these goods and services. In economics, we assess the standard of living of a person based on the amount of goods and services somebody is consuming. Basically, the amount of nutritious food, air conditioning, healthcare, holidaying. Okay, So all these goods and services which somebody is consuming as per their demand, as per their desire, if it is at a higher level, then we say the standard of living is high. On the other hand, if somebody is not having access to various goods and services which she or he like to consume, okay, then she is suffering from a low standard of living. So the first condition for availing such goods and services for consumption of the citizens of the country is very production of those goods and services, which GDP reflects. Secondly, GDP also in a way reflects total amount of income generated. So basically, as all of us earn our livelihood by participating in production of various goods and services, like I as work as a university professor, we produce lecture sessions and give degrees. Somebody works as an administrator, someone else working as a farmer, someone else working as an engineer. So by participating in production of various goods and services, we earn our income. So the simple idea is, if more goods and services are produced, accordingly more workers, engineers are required for working for production of these goods and services. So more production leads to more income generation. Again, in the session when I'll be discussing about GDP computation, so that day will be technically establishing how in an economy total production of goods and services, which we have been telling as GDP, is also equal to total amount of income generated in that economy. Now there are two other things, economic growth and per capita GDP, their relevance I'll be coming little later. Now first let me give you some information about India's GDP in the recent years. So as you can see, the GDP of India for last 7 years I have listed here. So there is a gradual increase in India's GDP except 2020-21, as you can see. So in 2025-26, India's GDP was close to 202 trillion. The figures are in rupees crore, so you can say it is 201 trillion. And if basically this is the data source from which I have obtained from Reserve Bank's official website. The link is given here. And if I'm talking about a long period of data, the red line here represents movement of Indian GDP over last 75 years or so. So what we are observing in India, the amount of goods and services produced in total, and so amount of income generated for the economy as a whole has witnessed significant improvement in last 75 years or so. So in a way, as I said, total GDP and total income also reflects the economic welfare enjoyed by the society, citizens of the country taken as a whole. So this also reflects the amount of goods and services and overall economic welfare which Indians have enjoyed in last 75 years or so. Now let me come to the next concept, which is related to GDP, that is economic growth. Economic growth technically measures the percentage change in GDP in the current year as compared to the previous year. So in terms of formula, economic growth is equal to GDPT minus GDPT minus 1 whole divided by GDPT minus 1 multiplied by 100. So the example, one numerical example is given below. So India's GDP in 2025-26 was nearly 202 trillion, and that in 2024-25 was nearly 188 trillion. If I calculate the percentage change using the formula, I get it as 7.4%. So economic growth conceptually suggests the rate at which total production of goods and services in a particular year had changed as compared to that in the preceding year. So if economic growth is high, like say 7%, 8%, 10%, this is suggesting total amount of goods and services produced in this year is higher by 10% or 6% or 8%, whatever that growth rate is, compared to that in the preceding year. So implicitly, higher economic growth reflects improvement in the overall standard of living or economic welfare of citizens as a whole for a particular country. On the contrary, if economic growth is low, like say 1%, 2%, or negative, then it suggests that overall economic welfare in a particular country is growing at a slow pace if it is growth rate is low, and if it is falling, then growth rate is basically, the overall economic welfare has basically dropped in a year compared to the preceding year. So given the importance of economic growth, which is critical to sustain gradual improvement in overall economic welfare of a country, so economists emphasize, they place high emphasis on GDP and economic growth to talk about broad macroeconomic environment of a particular country. Okay, so as I said, this is just one of the several macroeconomic indicators. So GDP and its growth rate, that is economic growth, capturing only one part of the overall macroeconomic environment, reflecting size of the economy and the rate at which size of the economy is basically improving in 1 year compared to the preceding year. So here I have depicted the annual economic growth of India for last 75 years or so. As you can see, in first 30 years or so after independence, not only the average economic growth was low, around 3.5 or 8%, it was quite volatile. You see growth rates closer to 8%. You also see growth rates closer to zero, and couple of years when growth rate was negative. If I'm talking about the first 30 years after independence. Compared to that, when I'm talking about the growth rate of economic growth of last 30 years, that is 90s, 2000s, 2010s, okay, what you can see that average economic growth has been at a much higher level, close to 6.5%. There is only 1 year, 2020-21, when growth rate was negative, and that was due to the COVID pandemic, which the whole world suffered from. So now, if economic growth is higher and more stable, this reflects that the overall economic prosperity of a particular country is progressing well at an accelerated pace. On the contrary, if economic growth is low and volatile, that suggests that the improvement in economic prosperity of a particular country is slow. As I'm repeating, GDP reflects total production as well as total income generation. So with availability of more goods and services and having purchasing power to purchase those goods and services, one can consume more goods and services, and then it will be reflecting a higher standard of living, right? So now let me come to the next thing, which is about per capita GDP. See, when we're talking about GDP, it is total production of goods and services. Now, this reflects size of the economy, but it doesn't reflect the standard of living of an average citizen of that country. I'll give this example. As I'm giving the formula, per capita GDP is nothing but GDP divided by population. So for a heavily populated country like us, like India, we are today the fourth largest economy of the world. So if we are basically ranking the countries as per the GDP number, we are the fourth largest. And this is this data which you can see on your screen. I got it from World Bank website. So this suggests, as per constant 2015 US dollar, our GDP in this is, I think, in 2024 is around 3.5 trillion, and the per capita GDP, because we're a highly populated country, is less than $2,500. On the contrary, Singapore, which is in terms of GDP quite small compared to India, but its population is hardly several millions. So although its GDP is quite low compared to India, around 400 billion. See, ours is 3.48 trillion, and that for Singapore is 408 billion. Okay, but then their per capita income is much higher at nearly 68,000, because the population of Singapore is quite low. So Singapore is categorized as one of the richest country of the world, and we are as part of lower middle income country. So this per capita GDP, high per capita GDP is used to rank the countries as rich versus poor or middle income country. So although overall we are producing more goods and services, given that we are a highly populated country, so the availability of goods and services per Indian, for average Indian, is quite low, and that for Singapore is quite high. So basically, I introduced these three concepts: GDP, economic growth, which is basically percentage change in GDP, and per capita GDP, which is a true barometer of standard of living of an average citizen of a particular country. So countries when are categorized as rich, poor, middle income, it is per capita GDP, per capita income, which is used for this purpose and not GDP. Okay. So, why I want to, focus on this topic, the comparison between GDP and per capita GDP. Sometimes, some news items appear in the media, which reflects the lack of clarity of, some of the people who are writing this. Like recently, I picked up a news item where this news item appeared on 1st of March, where it suggests that India's top richest country and richest states and poorest states are basically segregated. So according to this, Maharashtra with GSDP, what I'm talking about, GDP for a country, for a similar number for a state become GSDP, gross state domestic product. So GSDP for Maharashtra at 45 trillion puts it as the largest state in terms of production and income generation in India, and it is followed by Tamil Nadu at nearly 3.1 trillion. So Tamil Nadu GSDP is 31 trillion. Sorry. So this GSDP number reflects size of the economy of that particular state, but it basically should not be used for ranking them as rich and poor, right? So for categorizing countries or ranking the countries as rich and poor in terms of rich and poor, we should rather use per capita GSDP. Okay, similar number I have downloaded from Reserve Bank's website using the link which is given here. As per that, Gujarat stands out as the richest state in India. I think this is 2023-24 or 24-25. I think 23-24 at nearly 1.96 lakhs rupee. An average Gujarati in 2023-24 earned about 1.96 lakhs, and an average Karnataki, Kannada person, that way earned around 1.92 lakhs. So this way, if you want to categorize the states in terms of rich and poor, one should use per capita GSDP or NSDP rather than the whole number of GSDP. Okay, so I'm again clarifying. So GDP, GSDP measures overall size of a particular country or state, whereas per capita GDP or per capita income reflects the average income or standard of living of a particular citizen or citizen of that particular country. Okay, right. So just to relate how the per capita income and economic growth of a particular country is related, in this graph, the green line basically depicts the movement of per capita income in India. So as you can see, for first 30 years, the progress in per capita income was quite slow. The curve is nearly flat, and last 30 years, as you can see, the curve has become steeper, and this has a close connection with average economic growth that India witnessed. So in the first 30 years, India's economic growth on an average was nearly 3.8%. You can read that from the right hand scale of the graph. And for last 30 years, the average growth rate is around 6.5%, which helped India rapidly sort of achieving higher per capita income in the post-reform period. Okay, so again, I'm repeating the attempt. My endeavor today was sort of explaining a set of economic indicators which define the macroeconomic environment. So in this regard, I have chosen GDP, economic growth. GDP reflects the size of the economy in terms of total amount of goods and services produced and total amount of income generated. So overall standard of living or economic welfare of a country or of a state. And economic growth is percentage change in GDP, which basically reflects at what rate the overall economic welfare is improving for a country. But when we talk about the standard of living of an individual, it will be inappropriate just to focus on GDP and ignoring population, because a vastly populated country with a higher level amount of income may be constrained with having low per head income or per capita income, so reflecting lowest standard of living of average citizen of that country. And according to that, countries are sort of classified as rich, poor, and middle income. So for that, we are using per capita income or per capita GDP, and not the aggregate GDP. Okay, so I'm sure this was a small session, so many of you may have some questions. I'll suggest please get back to me using the email ID given here on the questions which you have, or if you require some clarification on what I said, I'll be happy to respond. And thank you for watching my uh, you know channel today. And in the subsequent days, I'll be coming up with discussing about other macroeconomic indicators which I had listed to sort of define the macroeconomic environment of a particular country. And then we'll go on to discuss about the conceptual issues and computation complications related to these macroeconomic indicators. Thank you.